your bi.
You're watching VATV, bringing Brookline home.
Hello, I'm Karma Kitai, and I'm your host for Alivelihood, New Adventures as We Age. Today I'm going to introduce you once again to Ruth Nemzoff. So Ruth was a guest on Alivelihood a few years ago when she had published a book about just handling relationships with adult children, which is called Don't Bite Your Tongue. So she now has published a new book about in-law relationships. So let's talk to Ruth about how that came about.
Well, I had a fabulous book tour with my first book. I went to 5 countries, 300 venues. And the fascinating thing was the most common and contentious question was an in-law question. How do I get along with my daughter-in-law? How do I get along with the other parents? And it may be many sets of other parents. How do I get along with my son-in-law? How do I get along with my mother-in-law, my father-in-law? And all of that was the most common question. Thus, I decided to write another book.
You had to.
Yes.
So do you have any way of understanding any clues you have about how come that was such an important question to people? And you're saying really all around the world, because I know you went all over.
Yes, well, part of it is history. You know, it's only very recently that marriage is between a man and a woman. You know, up until now, it's been pretty much a business deal. For the rich, it was a way to, protect their property. For the poor, for the giving family, the one who gave the daughter, they got rid of a mouth to feed. And for the family that was gaining the daughter, the gaining the daughter was getting a servant. So this is not a propitious soil for happiness.
Right.
So that's
very
one
interesting.
reason.
Yeah, I read that in the beginning of your book, and I said, gee, I never thought about it that way.
Right. And
so when you say it, it's only in recent centuries, maybe.
Well, I wouldn't even say centuries, because I think that even some of us have aunts or uncles who didn't marry their first love because, the young woman didn't have money to set the husband up in business or in practice or for whatever reason. So there was this tinge of finance in even the generation above me. And certainly in my generation, I remember hearing quoted, it's just as easy to fall in love with a rich man as a poor man, that sort of thing.
That, yes.
You heard that? Yes. So we see the vestige of that, and it doesn't die so quickly. So that, I think, is one reason.
Okay.
And we also see this living on in jokes. And the jokes are really vicious. So one joke might be 2 guys go into a bar. Of course, that's how all jokes start, right? Or many jokes start. And one says to the other, my mother-in-law is an angel. And the other says, you're lucky, mine's still alive. So we see a lot of jokes still reminiscent of that. Oh, here's another joke I see they're showing on this screen. This I found on the internet. So if you Google any kind of in-law joke, you'll find a million. for the son-in-law, the daughter-in-law, whatever.
Yeah.
I think
But it was serious business.
correct.
Very serious business between two sets of families, two clans.
Exactly. And
Right.
of course, every family is its own culture. And, you know, we're all very sensitive when we travel. But actually, when we marry, even if we marry the boy or girl next door, we are marrying into a totally different culture.
Yeah, that's right. I was sorry I interrupted you, but I was thinking, are you familiar with this concept about the romantic marriage? Is that something you've come across in your research about this? Because
I haven't come across it in my research, but I've come across it just in life, the notion that marriage...
But that's rather new,
right? That we will just, you know, live happily ever after and walk into the sunset. And of course, this is one of the problems, is a couple marries, and they think they're marrying a person. And then they discover, oh my God, I've gotten into this whole mess with a whole family and all sorts of obligations. And they might discover this before they're married, but often they don't discover it until suddenly a weekend is planned and a mother or a father gets sick, and suddenly everything gets canceled because we've got to go take care of the sick one, or maybe fix a screen door or do whatever's needed.
Yeah.
So all these things make it extremely difficult. And of course now with all sorts of intermarriage between cultures and with the globalization, we're really finding that you're marrying into a culture with very different signals, very different cues, very different expectations. And you didn't even know you had these expectations.
Sure.
Nor did the other person.
Right. So you probably know that I'm a psychotherapist.
I do know
as well
that.
as a
I do.
coach, a life coach.
Right.
But some of the couples that I work with, of course, express a lot of the things that you, I think, have to say in your book.
Right.
And, you know, they're not necessarily vastly different cultures that the two families come from.
Right, not on the surface, not by the demographers.
That's right.
But certainly by the daily life, they can be extremely different.
Yeah,
and they
very different expectations for their adult children.
Right. I mean, even the simple thing, you may come from a family that expects you to be on time to every family event. And I come from a family where, you know, if you make it within an hour of the time, you're on time.
Yeah.
That's something as simple as that, and people can get really miffed if you don't follow that culture.
It can seem very disrespectful, offensive to one side.
All that interpretation of behavior as disrespectful or putting negative spins on it, when in fact it may be that you're just living your life the way you always lived it. So I think that thinking good thoughts rather than bad is a good start.
So how do we get people to do that?
Well, I think, first of all, a great deal of understanding that nobody knows their role. So it's all new, both to the parents, to the kids, to the siblings, to the in-laws, and to the many sets of in-laws that can be in a family, and also to the many people who are in the family and may not be there by what we say by benefit of law or clergy. They're just they come all the time. They're coupled. For all sorts of reasons, they're coupled. It might be an older couple who isn't marrying because of pensions. It might be a younger couple who isn't marrying because the law doesn't allow them to marry, or because they're in support of a belief that, you know, marriage is not a good thing. Maybe they've been hurt by divorce and they don't want to go through a divorce. So all of these people are parts of our lives. And so I do have chapters in the book on each one of these groups: the parents, the kids, the siblings, the two sets of in-laws. And often they're competing, you know, they're competing for time with the kids. Who loves us more? Who gets more time with the grandchildren? Who's got more money? And I would say, don't compete. Run your own race. You know, in all our relationships, we need to develop a connection with the person. So some of the ways we do this is by, as I say, thinking good motives, not bad. Putting a statute of limitation on slights. So what I mean by that is, you may, the first time we met, have said something like, your hair looks nice. And I, for some reason, was self-conscious about my hair and thought that you were really picking on me. You know, well, maybe for 24 hours I could be upset about that. That's probably too long. But after that, forget it. Don't hold on to it for 40 years. So that's what I mean by a statute of limitations on slights.
Sure.
I would also say it's really, really important to realize that it takes a long time to build relationships. And when you think of your friends and how you built those relationships, it was over many years. It was sharing many things. Someone becomes a part of your family, and we make the assumption that we have something in common. We may not. We need to build those bonds slowly, maybe with a walk in the park, maybe by sharing a meal, maybe by sharing a newspaper article. But slowly over the years, we build that bond. And certainly by sharing, if we're lucky enough to share grandchildren and children, that helps. But it is over time, so tincture of time is really an important matter, and just realize that it's not going to happen instantly. Maybe it will happen instantly, but for most of us it doesn't.
Yeah. So you know what I was just thinking about my mother-in-law, who is no longer with us, but I can't remember any time that I ever spent alone time with her.
Yes.
So that's another thing, you know.
Well, yes, I think lots of people sort of say, well, what do I care about these people for? I mean, you know, I see them twice a year, we have a dinner, maybe we celebrate a holiday together. It's not worth my effort. But, you know, we all need support systems. And, you know, an accident, a newborn child who's sick, a newborn child who's healthy. Remember how much work that was? You know, we all need help, and this is a possibility as the first line of defense against totally falling apart. And the better relationships we have with family members can really help this. And of course, the other thing is, you know, these people brought up the person we loved at some point. And maybe that person is...
So there must be something good about that.
Exactly. And we owe them something. You know, well, thanks for doing something right. And if it's only giving birth to this person I love, right? Maybe you're screwed up completely after that. So I think in terms of our own selfishness, our own needs, but also I don't think we want to put our spouses or our children in between, because, you know, there could be a divorce in the future if we do that. You know, this is their family. So those are a couple of the reasons why I think it's really important to maintain these relationships. And over time, of course, the law makes us have certain relationships in common. So, for example, if a person dies without a will, what happens to the money? So we're connected legally in certain ways that we don't even expect to be. We don't even know about.
Yeah. So I know, speaking about a will, that you have a section in your book about, for example, end-of-life conversations.
Right. So what frequently happens is people don't have end-of-life conversations. And of course, as you know, the Conversation Project that Ellen Goodman, a Brookline resident, has recently started, along with Harvey Freistadt and others, encouraging people to talk about the end of life. And I want to extend that a little further to say you should also talk about it with your in-law children. Because first of all, what often happens still to this day is it is the daughter-in-law who does the daily taking to doctor's appointments. The son cares for the parents also, but often with more instrumental tasks, you know, doing the bills and so forth and so on. Not always, but frequently. And so that in-law child needs to know some of your wishes. In addition, you don't want to cause tension between the couple, because maybe your child says, my mother really wants no extreme measures. And the daughter-in-law says, oh my God, she told me she did. She wants to be alive no matter what. So I think these are very important discussions to have. I also,
and of course, those are discussions that we don't easily have even with our own parents or our own children.
Absolutely. But, you know, if our children are going to be responsible adults, they kind of need to know what our finances are. They don't need to know every penny, But they do need to know something like, you know, I have enough to stay in my home 15 years after retirement, or 2 years after retirement, or whatever. But we, in turn, need to know about our children, because if we're going to be responsible, for example, if they expect, sadly, accidents happen, if they expect us to take care of their children, we need to have just a global idea of what they've provided for their children. Do they have life insurance? Do they not have life insurance? What are their hopes and dreams for their children? Because if they haven't made those kinds of plans, we really can't help if our help is needed.
Yeah, so as you say, extended families, in-law families are a safety net for the whole group.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it goes in both directions.
Yes, and if there's a crisis, we're often having much more interaction with an in-law child or the other in-laws than we ever expected. Yeah. We sort of thought we'd see them at the grandkids' graduation, and here we are, you know, living in a 2-bedroom apartment trying to deal with a sickly newborn while the mother is in the hospital recovering.
Sure, yeah. So you have several children yourself.
I do, right? 4.
4,
yes. 7.5 grandchildren.
And they're all married?
Yes,
so you
they
have
are.
All those in-law families?
Yes, I do. And one thing I think that has made it so wonderfully pleasant for me is that we all want to reach out and be curious about each other, and instead of judging, figure out why people do things differently, because, you know, we can all learn. You know, you continue to learn and grow, and it's all been incredibly interesting. So.
Yeah. Do I remember correctly that some of your children have married into other cultures?
Absolutely, yes. And it's been incredibly interesting.
Oh.
And I think we've learned a lot, and I think the other in-laws have learned a lot. And we don't try to judge each other's way of doing things. And the certainly, you know, religion or culture is both universal and particular. So, for example, cultures take care of the young. Cultures make a living. You know, there are different ways of doing that. But fundamentally, everyone wants to take care of the children, right? You want them to survive. Religion, you know, wants everyone to do justice and love mercy and, you know, walk humbly, whatever, be good people. And focusing on those universal really helps.
Even though the rituals might be very different from
Correct.
culture to culture.
Exactly.
Yeah. So,
Yes.
I would say you probably have had some of that experience personally of having to learn about other people's cultures and maybe accept some things that were
But
pretty
you know,
foreign to you.
whether your child marries from another culture or not, our children do things differently because they are born into a different world. So, for example...
So they're a different culture by definition.
By definition. And I think, for example, I may have turned on Sesame Street at 4 o'clock because I was going crazy with the kids when they were little. But that was the only time it was on. Now one can use the television all the time if you wanted to. Now, hopefully you won't just put your child in front of the TV. But these are issues that young people are grappling with where we didn't have that option because there weren't as many devices to deal with. So that would be one example.
Right, different culture.
Right.
Yeah. And of course all the electronic cultures
yes,
that
exactly.
You know, kids are constantly hanging on to.
And so they need different skills from the skills we needed. Certainly the skills of traveling. Travel is much more available. Many people are going many different places. You need different skills. How do you keep friends over a lifetime, over distance? That's a real skill that we need to learn.
Yeah.
So, and also families need to learn that. How do you relate over distances? Certainly Skype, you know, traditional annual get-togethers, those kinds of things really do help bond the children.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like this is a very exciting topic, and you know a lot about it, both personally and professionally, right?
Yes. And one of the things I've done in this book, as I did in the other book, is I have questions at the end of each chapter. And that's so that people can think of it alone or do it in groups. And a lot of church groups, book clubs, so forth, have used it for that. And it's just, I guarantee, a bonding experience and a learning experience, because we all learn from each other.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Good.
So I just want to digress a little bit from your book, because I know that you came to your writing career later in life, Ruth.
Yes.
Right?
My first book contract age 66 and my second age 70.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
So never too late to write that book, right?
Never too late, yes. And of course now with this one is by Macmillan. But it's never too late. Now we can publish on the net by ourselves, so lots of opportunity for people to write. And I really encourage people to do that.
Yeah. So did you do much in the way of writing before you started doing these books?
No, I hated writing because I found the spelling so hard. And
but
then
now that's not a
it
problem
suddenly
any
occurred to me
longer.
that they're two different tasks, writing and spelling.
Right.
And
But of course we can always use spell check now.
exactly. So there's a case where the modern systems have helped me a great deal. And also you don't have to, it's hard for the fingers to write. It's much easier to type.
I know.
So I find it easier than a yellow pad.
Right. Yeah. I started using a computer, I think, when I did my dissertation back in the 80s. And now I find, even if I'm writing something for my blog, which is called retirementasyowantit.com, I can't think about it until I sit down to the computer.
Yes.
That's the association for thinking.
Right, yes. Well, I think that this is a wonderful thing to do as a legacy to give your children. And so I would encourage people. And sometimes, it's hard for us to express our emotions because different families express it differently. And sometimes writing can be the way. And other times just watching people's actions rather than expecting, I met this one woman who said, I wanted my son-in-law to hug and kiss me. And he didn't do that, but he did say, please come back anytime. You're welcome in my home. That's a kind of hug and kiss. So really recognizing the many different ways of communicating can really help.
Yeah.
Good.
So I just wanted to have you mention a few of the things that you did in your previous incarnations.
Okay, because I think actually the book ties my whole life together. We've talked about the kids, but I was also a state legislator and part of the leadership of the New Hampshire legislature. And I'm very pleased now how some of my legacy of all those women in office in New Hampshire. Feel great about that.
Yeah.
And then I was a professor for many years at Bentley University, and now I'm a resident scholar at Brandeis University in the Women's Studies Research Center.
Okay.
And
what was your field at Bentley?
I taught U.S. government, of course, from my government background, and gender studies, because in my volunteer life, I started the women's movement in southern New Hampshire. So being an activist has been a theme in my life, and being engaged civically, I think, is another wonderful way. And I think that one of the things we can do for our children and our in-law children is sort of have many arenas in our lives so that we're not totally dependent on them for our own self-concept and our good thoughts about ourselves.
Right, yeah. And you must be quite a role model to your children and
well, on some days,
right?
Some days for the good and some days not so good. And I think that's another important point. We don't all do it perfectly, and certainly not all the time. And hopefully we can forgive each other.
Yeah, but that's all part of the legacy that we leave, though.
Totally.
The good and the not so good.
Right, and how we deal with the not so good, because the not so good will be part of it.
Right.
Good.
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought up that issue of legacy, because I think certainly the written word is a legacy that we can leave to people.
Right, but also just wonderful times together is another legacy.
Yes, yeah.
And caring. Sometimes just being a caring presence is a wonderful legacy you're leaving someone. How to do that.
Yeah, so Have we missed anything very important? Because we just have a couple of minutes left.
Well, I think the most important thing for me is that we can really learn and constantly grow and change. And that let's not freeze anyone in the family to how they were before. And that is really important. We can all grow and develop. And writing each other off is really, it's our own loss of people who, you know, can be loving and helpful to us if we really work hard at it.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Well, I wish my mother had had this book many decades ago. Because
well, actually, that's really important. Is one of the functions this book serves is, both of these books, is creating that conversation. Just being able to talk about it and realizing that it isn't all our own fault. Some of it's the way we were brought up. We're all products of our pasts, but we can change our futures. So,
well, I think you have some very lovely messages in both of these books.
thank you.
So
People tell me they've been helpful, so that's really wonderful to me.
yeah. And I know you're available to give talks.
I am, and I have given a lot, and I really enjoy it. I really like people, and I like talking to people.
Okay. And in what kinds of venues would you like to talk?
Oh, I've been in all sorts of groups, you know. My favorite to talk is at a fundraiser where the group makes a lot of money as a speaker, as the, you know, sort of the speaker where the group makes a lot of money. Because then I feel like I'm also doing community service
that's
at
right.
the same time.
Oh, that sounds wonderful.
That's my favorite.
Yeah, that's very generous of you.
Yes, I'll be speaking at the Brookline Mental Health Center on April 30th. Not at the center, but they're having me speak at some place.
Okay. And we're talking about Brookline, Massachusetts.
Yes, we are. And I'm excited about that. I'm speaking in China for a high school group, parents as their children emerge. I've spoken at universities, all sorts of clubs of various kinds, churches, synagogues.
Yeah. So how can people reach you, Ruth?
They can reach me at ruthnemzoff.com or my website, don'tbiteyourtongue.com, or they can do rnemzoff at brandeis.edu.
So different ways to reach you.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And we'll wait for your third book.
Oh, please, never.
No?
Well, maybe sometime.
Okay. Thank you. So join me next time on Alivelihood, New Adventures as We Age, when I will have a new guest for you.